Welcome on Texas football. Some breaking news today, CJ, just moments ago. DeAndre Moore, the wide receiver that came to Texas out of Southern California, has announced that he is going to the transfer portal via ESPN's Pete Thamel. We expected Moore to leave the team. We had heard it was NFL draft, but maybe the NFL draft numbers didn't come back the way he wanted. He instead enters the portal. But either way, we had kind of accounted for Moore no longer being with the team in 2026. Your thoughts on the situation?
Yeah, for about a month and a half now, it kind of built up to this point where it felt as if DeAndre Moore was no longer going to be with this team in 2026. And to your point, the NFL draft got some buzz. We had heard behind the scenes that was where he was leaning. Altogether, the portal remained an option, and that appears to be the avenue in which DeAndre Moore is taken. Look, I've heard Oregon, I've heard USC. I know the West Coast is going to be a familiar place for him, having come out of modern day. But look, this is a move I don't think was a surprise to anyone inside the building inside of Moncrief, Bobby. This was something that folks on the Texas staff were accounting for over the last month or two of the season, if you will. Altogether, a fantastic teammate, a great locker room kid, great leadership capabilities. Wherever he ends up, I wish the best for DeAndre Moore.
Yeah, I think we all do. I've got to say this real quick about Moore as it relates to this. He had a very productive career and was also a good leader off the field. I think, in my opinion, guys, that, as good as he was, Texas has to make room for a player in the portal. They needed a slot kind of guy that can be explosive up the middle of the field. I think that DeAndre Moore was not necessarily exactly what they wanted, and so they decided to move on. He had told them he was going to the NFL draft. That being said, Texas didn't necessarily press to keep DeAndre Moore here. Let me ask you this, CJ. As we look at his numbers, I think he had 77 catches in his Texas career, a good productive player. But now what does this mean to the rest of the receiving corps that ostensibly is returning, including Ryan Wingo, Parker Livingston, Dalen McCutcheon, those guys?
Well, first and foremost, 532 yards, 4 touchdowns this year, a productive player, right? He was in the starting lineup when healthy every single week for the Texas Longhorns. The one guy who benefits the most from this, and this, of course, is the short term, right? Before we look ahead to 2026 when Jermaine Bishop comes to campus, who knows where Texas goes out of the portal. But for Dalen McCutcheon, who immediately inserts into the starting lineup, look, we've seen the staff trust Dalen McCutcheon in games, big games, right? Early in the season, we saw him at times against Ohio State, right? You see him on the road against Georgia. He played against Oklahoma and Florida. The staff seemed to trust Dalen McCutcheon from the moment that he stepped foot on campus. He will be the one immediately stepping into a starting role against Michigan in the bowl game. I've been told, as DeAndre Moore was dealing with a bit of a foot injury over the last couple of weeks in practice, it was Dalen McCutcheon taking those first team reps. That's not a surprise to anybody. But look, for Dalen, it was seven targets this year, 6 receptions. They went for 70 yards. And again, they threw him out there at times when you sat there and said, okay, it's a little bit surprising to see him out there, but that shows you the trust level that the staff already had with McCutcheon. That's a great sign. But for him, he's the immediate benefactor of Moore's departure before, obviously, we see what a Jermaine Bishop Jr. brings to the table. Who knows what Cohen Brown might be able to bring, as well as a true freshman. And then, of course, Bobby, to your point, the portal will remain an option as Texas looks to fill out its 2026 starting lineup.
CJ, as we look at that, you mentioned McCutcheon. I also neglected to mention Emmett Mosley. Give us the stats of the Texas receivers that are returning as of right now, starting with Ryan Wingo and Parker Livingston, as well as Emmett Mosley.
Yeah, Ryan Wingo, of course, he led your team in receptions and targets and yards. He led your team in touchdowns, right? 50 receptions on 87 targets. It was 7 touchdowns, 770 yards. Again, that's your leading receiver at 770. Emmett Mosley in just 8 games, 23 receptions on 43 targets. He had 357 yards and 3 scores. And then Parker Livingston, big play waiting to happen. He led your team in yards per reception, had 6 touchdowns, 491 yards on 26 receptions. That's 19 yards per catch, Bobby. So you have a good nucleus of guys that are set to return. It's all about how do you elevate that group with perhaps a portal addition.
Yeah, and I think if you're trying to find a portal guy, maybe one of those four, Moore, Livingston, or Wingo could have been or Mosley could have been the odd man out. It sounds like Moore may have been the odd man out in that decision process or that decision tree from the University of Texas and the personnel department. Do you read anything into this as him? The other piece I want to ask him going in the portal as opposed to him going pro, which is what we initially reported. Do you think that had something to do with maybe what he heard back from the NFL draft folks?
Yeah, I think so. Look, the hands were inconsistent. There were times where you sat there and said, okay, that was a ball that probably should have been caught, right? I think no more of an instance that comes to mind than the Clemson game, right? Where you have a pass intended to Moore, hits him in the chest, it ends up getting intercepted, and you lose an offensive lineman on the play due to injury trying to make a tackle on the play. You sit there and say, well, okay, you got to have more. But on the same time, you see a big play against Georgia in the SEC championship, the catch and run on the slant, you make a guy miss, and you get to the house. For me, there's probably not a lot of value in what Moore does best towards the NFL level, and that's doing a lot of the dirty work, right? He is one of the best in blocking on the perimeter. He's very selfless when it comes to playing the other role, if you will, for wide receivers. And that's something that, of course, is big for college programs. How much will that translate if those big time production numbers don't align? I'm sure he's looking for an increased role, Bobby, with probably a larger volume share wherever he ends up.
Yeah, and I got to say this, I don't think he's going to get that at USC or Oregon. And if those are the schools you're hearing, I've watched those teams, and I think they have receivers that may be a little more explosive than he is. And I think that ultimately may be the deciding factor, which receivers are explosive. And I think you mentioned Livingston's long yardage per catch. Wingo, we know, is explosive with all those runs after catch. And Emmett Mosley, in limited time, started seeing more catches as the season went on. So we'll see how it breaks down. You talk about this. What does Texas need to do about it? Like, we already thought he was gone, so it's not like this is earth-shattering news. Does Texas need that slot receiver now in the portal? That's kind of what we thought going into it, because we already thought he was gone. You sticking with that at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a guy that can catch the ball and make something out of nothing. And I'm not saying DeAndre Moore couldn't do that. Just consistently, Bobby, there's a level of electricity that I think was absent from this Texas wide receiving room at times. It was big play or bust, essentially, unless the blocking game and a wide receiver screen was set up perfectly. And even then, we saw times where, there was yards still to be had. But Texas needs to find someone like a Zachariah Branch, someone that can catch a ball underneath, make a guy miss, and create with the ball in his hands. And again, too often this past year, I thought it needed to be caught down the field for a big play to be created. And in this conference, you need to be able to create separation in man coverage. You need to be able to find ways to basically just make people miss with the ball in your hands. Someone like a Jermaine Bishop, again, we'll see how early he's able to learn and engulf himself in this offense. But ultimately, you got to create with the ball in your hands at the slot spot. That's something I'm looking forward to Texas finding.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said beat man coverage. Beat man coverage early is important, because Texas has people who could beat man coverage downfield. Parker Livingston showed that. Emmett Mosley showed that. Ryan Wingo showed that. But they got to find a guy that can beat man coverage early, that can be a hot route guy in case of blitzes, et cetera. Moore, while he's a good receiver, is not necessarily the perfect anecdote for that,
right?
In my opinion, to your point. All right, we're watching a couple other news and notes that could be happening. We mentioned yesterday, CJ, that Hero Kanu is expected to return to Texas. That's the defensive tackle. Still waiting on announcements from Trey Weiser, the running back, tight end Jack Indries, Trevor Gooseby, the big offensive tackle, and Jelani McDonald as well, the defensive back. Connor Robertson walked as a senior. He may be a guy that returns as well. We're waiting to see exactly what he does as well. All right, that's going to do it for this special update. Thank you to duckcamp.com. They are our sponsor for this episode of On Texas Football. Duck Camp gear is ready for all seasons. football season, hunting season, and every season in between. I'm wearing one of their hoodies right now. They say get out there and stay out there and hook them this holiday season. Shop Duck Camp at duckcamp.com. Use code ONTexas25 for 25% off. That's ONTexas25 for 25% off. Born right here in Austin, Duck Camp builds best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel that works as well for a full day in the field as it does for a long day of tailgating. Again, duckcamp.com. Use code ONTexas25 for 25% off. DeAndre Moore, one last note. Thanks for everything you did for the Texas Longhorns. Solid Longhorn through and through. Wish you nothing but the best of luck in your future. Hook 'em horns.
Hook 'em.